No.
It's at least exciting to hear that it's moving forward.
Yes. I hadn't heard that they didn't get the grant, so I guess they've applied for a smaller grant now.
I just was thinking it's too bad they couldn't have solved this or done something more before Kay Khan retired, because she spent her whole career on this.
I know. Well, I've been working with her for at least 12 years.
She's been working on it for like 30 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's been working on it for 30 years.
Yeah.
Jackman, am I correct? We only have three of them?
So Counselor Moore is currently being promoted.
Ah, she must be thrilled. Okay. Great. Then,
Recording in progress.
thank you, Jackman. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to an irregularly scheduled meeting of the Programs and Services Committee. I think we delayed this one from last week, so thank you all for being here at this late date and late time. We are being audio and video recorded, so take note of that. My name is Josh Krinsman. I am a counselor at large from Ward 4, chair of the Programs and Services Committee. Also joining us from the committee at the moment, we have from Ward 2, Counselor David Mickley. From Ward 3, Counselor Julia Maliki. From Ward 6, Counselor Alan Lobovitz. I think those are the only members of the committee. I also see Counselors Allison Leary, Susan Albright, Pam Wright joining us as well. I see Mr. Andrew Lee from the city. Thank you for being here. Mr. Welch and Commissioner Banks. Thank you all for being here. Did I miss anyone? Okay. And of course, our esteemed clerk, Jacqueline, thank you for being here.
I think John Oliver's here. Did you say that?
I didn't. Not only is Councilor Oliver here now, he's a member of the committee. So I really care about Councilor Oliver. Councilor Oliver, thank you for coming and congratulations on being promoted to panelist.
Any promotion I can get at any given time, right?
All right, so it's late, so we'll get started. We only have a few items tonight, and at least one of them hopefully is fairly quick, but let's see. First item on our agenda is item 149-24. This is an ordinance change to prohibit the sale of tobacco in Newton to anyone born on or after January 2nd, 2000. Councilor Albright, you filed this item. I think you may have one or two other people interested in speaking here. So let me turn it over to you, say sort of what the impetus of this was, certainly why we now know that it would be constitutional, and what you want to say about it.
Okay, thank you very much. Jacqueline, I'm not sure if the folks from Brookline are here. I see Mark Gottlieb is here, but Anthony and Kate from Brookline might also be in attendees, if you could promote them as well. So I first read about this sometime this winter, that at the Supreme Judicial Court had ruled in favor of the town of Brookline with their bylaw to prevent, in their case, it was the sale of cigarettes to anyone born after January 1st, 2000. And this was an ordinance, a bylaw that they passed 3 years ago. And actually, and I put this in my memo to everybody, which I apologize for sending so late, they recommend that we change the date that I put in the docket item. I copied it straight from their docket item, but it really should be either 2024 or 2025 to be discussed by this committee and the law department. What I sent along was a bunch of background information, just so that everybody was on the same page with respect to, it's already illegal to sell cigarettes to people under the age of 21. And Newton has made some changes to our ordinances, and I sent you a link to the tobacco page on our city's website to see what those are. And I know when I first read about it, I was concerned about vending machines, and we already prevent the sale of cigarettes through vending machines in Newton. So all of the other ways for people to buy cigarettes should be prohibited if we prevent this. the idea is, I think that we're all aware that smoking is detrimental to your health. That 1/5 of all the people who smoke, I think, is the cigarette, is the statistic. They're dying from this smoking, and smoking is the cause of so many deaths in the United States. So I don't think we have to go over the fact that it's definitely not good for your health to be a smoker. And the idea is to prevent young people at the age of 21, when they're allowed to go buy cigarettes, the idea is to prevent them from being able to buy them. And eventually, over time, maybe we stop this habit from killing people. I spoke with the folks who originally developed this bylaw for Brookline. Anthony Ishak is here, and I don't know if Kate is here or not. She had a dual booking, and Mark Gottlieb is here. He was the attorney who helped get this thing through the Supreme Judicial Court, and I think he's online here as well.
He's here. Let me thank you, Councillor Albright. Let me quickly welcome Councillors Kelly and Greenberg, who have joined us. I just want to clarify, when you said something for the committee to debate, you were talking about ages, right? Or you were talking about the year at which this should kick in, right? Or the date after which one could no longer purchase cigarettes if one was born after date. Okay.
I believe that let me just clarify that when it was passed 3 years ago in Brookline, the idea was this date would pick up from when people turn 21 and they would no longer be able to buy cigarettes because of the bylaw. So the year 2000 is not exactly right to make sense. That's why they suggested 2024 or 2025, depending on when we put it into effect, if we pass it.
When you say 2024, can you explain that? It's currently, you mean people born after, people who are 21 now? So
Yes.
4/10/2003.
Yes, but if we delayed the implementation, it might be 2025. It might be the right time to do that. So we would decide that as we go.
Understood. So what I'd love to ask, and maybe Mr. Gottlieb, I don't know if you're the right person to ask this of, but given the fact that the SJC ruled on the Brookline ordinance bylaw, and given what we know from what the SJC said, that such an ordinance would be constitutional, that this withstood the scrutiny of the court, I wonder if you could maybe just speak a little bit about the court case, or why that was, and also whether perhaps in your opinion it's better to have sort of a patchwork of dates across different municipalities, or if it's better to try and harmonize the date after which cigarette purchase is illegal, so that you don't just have people sort of, for lack of a better term, forum shopping for where they can go get their cigarettes because it's a later date.
Thank you, Josh, and thanks for having me at your late committee meeting. I just wanted to add to something that Councillor Albright had mentioned, and that's to be clear that the policy that was passed in Brookline applies to all tobacco products, not just to cigarettes, and is being referred to these days in Massachusetts as the nicotine-free generation policy, to emphasize that it's all recreational nicotine products, including vapes and the like. So yeah, it was in 2020, late 2020, that the Brookline Town Meeting passed a warrant with this to amend its tobacco bylaw to include this policy, which slowly phases out the sale of all tobacco products over many years, starting with the next generation. And those are people who are not yet old enough to be sold tobacco products. And that's sort of the idea here, is that it doesn't take any existing customers away from local retailers. And nobody who is likely to be a young person likely to be nicotine dependent is going to be affected and have to go to another community to purchase the nicotine products that they're going to need every day. So it's a very gentle phase out. it was challenged by the retailers, a number of tobacco retailers in Brookline on two grounds. One was that it was in conflict with the state statute that sets the minimum sales age for tobacco products to 21. Initially, the Office of the Attorney General weighed in as it's required to approve warrant articles before they can become law, and found that it was not in conflict, that in fact it was complementary to the purpose of the state statute setting the 21 age for tobacco sales. The second theory was that it creates a equal protection problem under the Massachusetts Constitution by creating two classes of individuals, some who are born before this date who can purchase tobacco products, and some who are born after that date. And we have been at the Public Health Advocacy Institute at Northeastern University School of Law advocating for this policy for some time, and had made a sort of a standing offer to communities in Massachusetts that if a community stepped forward and tried this policy, we would be happy to defend it if it came under challenge. And so we did so pro bono for the town of Brookline, and filed a motion to dismiss in, I believe, late 2021, and in late 2022, that motion was granted by Judge Davis in Norfolk Superior Court. The retailers appealed, and the Supreme Judicial Court took the appeal sua sponte on its own to determine these issues. During this whole time, Brookline has been enforcing this policy, and they are the first place in the world actually to implement this policy. And the SJC unanimously ruled in favor of the town and found that there was no preemption, found that there was nothing close to an equal protection argument. They gave very little credence to that discussion, and noted how important in Massachusetts the work of cities and towns is in creating public health policy. And it's a long tradition of that with Tobacco 21, with flavors, with smoke-free workplaces, to name a few. And all of those involved, a town-by-town approach until enough towns did it so that the legislature took action and everything became uniform. That being said, I think there is something to be said for trying to not have as many different birth dates as possible as more and more communities pass this. We just had Stoneham and Wakefield pass this a couple of weeks ago. And in both of those towns, they chose January 1st, 2004 as the birth date. And those people will turn, I guess, 21 sometime after January 1st, 2025. And that was the effective date for the regulations passed in those communities. And I think that would make sense going forward, so that no one is affected who is currently able to purchase tobacco products. And, our offer at the Public Health Advocacy Institute stands to defend any challenges, but I don't think there is much left that could be challenged in the courts should other communities decide to adopt this policy.
That's very
Mr.
helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, let me just say that I confused myself when I said 2024. I was taking into account the date of that it is now 2024. Of course, 2004 or 2005 was really what I was talking about for the ordinance. Sorry about that.
No problem. I thought I understood. I just wanted to clarify so that we all knew what we were debating. Interesting argument about two classes of citizens. I'm not sure which one would be the higher class, those who get to kill themselves, or the other ones, but it's an interesting argument. Mr. Ishak, did you want to add anything? I know Councilor Albrecht brought you here. I just wanted to give you an opportunity if there was something you wanted to add as well.
I'll just bring up a few points. So I'm a pharmacist in adult primary care. I deal with people with diabetes and high blood pressure. And so that was the impetus for me bringing this up. The reason initially that we thought of this was, if you think back to 2019, prior to the COVID pandemic, the headlines in the Washington Post and other newspapers were about the epidemic happening with underage youth using vaping products. And so we worked on passing a flavor bylaw in Brookline, and then 6 months later, the state passed one. But it forced us to think about this. Tobacco companies are continuously trying to think about how to stay ahead of policy and how to get people addicted. It gets harder to continuously be reactive. And a lot of the policies that are out there would have been hard to implement. This was one to help do it slowly and stay ahead of any potential new ideas that tobacco comes up with, whether it might be, a tobacco patch or anything else. So this was the main reason for it, was because of the creativity of tobacco companies in trying to get people addicted. One statistic is 90% of users start underage. I will highlight a couple of other things with this as far as the proposal. One, as both Mark and Susan have mentioned, is that doesn't affect people who are already currently using. It's meant to prevent new users. It does not affect, which is one area that some people are concerned with, nicotine replacement products that are by prescription. So nicotine patch and any tobacco cessation products that are approved by the FDA, this does not apply to it. It just applies to, as has been mentioned, recreational products. Most of you are probably aware of the impact of our budget by healthcare coverage in the state of Massachusetts. It's not an insignificant percentage. Just to give you an idea, if we were to decrease tobacco use in our state by about 1%, it represents $70 million in savings to the budget in the first year. Granted, Newton by itself won't be 1%, but every municipality that adds on this moves us forward in terms of achieving that goal. So that's the brief background I wanted to give. Again, I'm in support of choosing a date that doesn't affect people already using. Those people will choose to stop either by illness or by choice, but it's very creative in helping to prevent people from using, particularly as being a neighboring town. One of the arguments you will sometimes hear is that potentially people will go to the municipality nearby. Well, with us having a stricter bylaw, that's not likely to happen. And as we know, any additional restriction that occurs with tobacco actually encourages more people to stop or avoid use. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. So what I would like to do is, well, first I'll see if Commissioner Walsh has any comments. I imagine this was the reason that she's here. But after I do that, what I'd love to do is have a discussion in committee about the policy and decide if this is something that folks are interested in moving forward with or not. And then, Mr. Lee, I would ask you, do you think it makes sense for us to hold it while we draft the ordinance to then come back? We had kind of, at one point, I think Mr. Temple and I had talked about a process through which, if we're going to do an ordinance change, we hold it in committee until we get a draft of the ordinance and then vote in committee after we've seen the language. And I think that's been the preference of the committee. So, Mr. Lee, can I ask you, do you think that process would make sense?
It would make sense, because in order to draft the language, we need an idea of exactly which policy the committee is interested in going, and then once that's set, we can have the text ready for review. Okay.
So, Councilor Albright, I didn't discuss that with you beforehand, but if that makes sense to you, that's the sort of process I'd like to follow. Okay. Commissioner Walsh, I see you are here. Are you here for this item, and did you want to weigh in on the merits of smoking?
I am here. Oh, gosh, no. I am here to listen and learn. I saw that it was placed on the agenda, and I am here active listening and learning. So thank you for recognizing me, but I will listen.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. Any councilors, do you have any questions or just want to make comments? I don't see any hands yet. And now that I have let a few seconds pass, I will say that I still do not see any hands. And I'm not seeing anything happening. Sorry, I should have said, this is where councilors get to discuss this and where people can weigh in and say if they think this is a good idea or a bad idea. So, Councilor Leary, great.
I didn't want there to not be any hands up to talk about this important subject. So when I first got on the council, that's when I worked on raising the age in Newton from 18 to 21. And it was a very good learning experience for me. And I learned that years before, Needham had actually done this ahead of us. So of course, we know firsthand about the health effects and impacts of smoking. And at first, when I heard this, I thought it was rather draconian. And then I thought if there was there a slippery slope for this? I mean, what's to stop them from doing it to alcohol or other things that we don't want people using? Though I think tobacco in itself is a special case because, of the widespread use and the impacts of it, and it is one of the most addictive substances known to people. And I know it certainly killed a lot of people in my family over the years. And I'm really glad that no one in my family smokes. And I do find that people that still smoke tend to be people, particularly I've noticed, I worked with people with mental illness in the past, and I noticed many people smoke. And I'm wondering if there's any beneficial effects for certain populations who are dealing with particularly mental health issues. That would be I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. But I don't think that this, phasing it out would impact them so much because, as you know, those folks are most adults now. I don't think it would have that much of an impact. So the more I thought about it, the more I thought it made sense. But it's new to me, and if there's any other, things that people have brought up or want to think about, I'm here to listen. But after giving it some thought, I think it makes sense to do so. Those are my initial reactions to this.
Thank you. We have been joined, and I apologize if it was a while ago, Councillor Humphrey. If I didn't see you, I'm sorry. Vice Chair of the committee from Ward 5, Councillor Humphrey, is here and would like to speak.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure how long my cell service will hold, so I'll try to be quick. I think I'm in favor of this. I think the public health case is super clear on this. I think there's also just a very clear argument that the more challenging we make this, the more we can get people off of it. And, I think the phase-in plan that they're recommending seems like a reasonable approach here. And, this is, as others have mentioned, an industry that's very dangerous, not only to public health, but they also throw their weight around politically quite a bit. So, I think there's a lot of good arguments to be had here. And certainly among the younger users that are picking this up, it tends to be disproportionately from some of these sub-communities of young people that are indeed struggling with various things. Sometimes they're, LGBTQ youth who get addicted and things like that. And that's really unfortunate. And this isn't a policy to punish them. This is something to help a lot of those folks. Same with, as Councillor Larry mentioned about folks with maybe mental health challenges and things like that. So I see this as part of a helpful step and something to do in conjunction with our neighboring community in Brookline that took the lead on this once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Humphrey. So my understanding is you're supportive of this. Does that mean you would also support the 1104 birthday as the applicable date following on what I think was Stoneham and Wakefield? If I have that wrong, I apologize, but I think Stoneham and Wakefield did.
Yeah, I may have missed the very beginning part. What was the date that Brookline ended up with?
So I think Brookline was 1/2/2000, but there was sort of years of legal wrangling before and getting the ordinance passed before it went into effect. So the more recent communities that have done it chose 1104 as the date because those are people who have not yet turned 21. And so they wouldn't experience a period of being able to purchase tobacco and then not.
Yeah, so I would have been fine with going further as Brookline did, but I can see the rationale and the recommendations that we're getting from the folks that, are advocating for this and prepared to defend it. So I'm willing to magnanimously compromise on this point.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, if I'm misstating anything that's been said, just, raise a hand and set me straight. Councillor Malachy.
Yeah, thank you. Oops, okay. Yeah, I'm pretty sympathetic to this idea because I grew up as a child in the 60s of smoking parents and spent, car trips sticking my nose out the back window saying, please, do you have to smoke? And they passed away in their mid to late 70s of basically heart disease and related cardiovascular things. I think the approach of the fact that it's a gradual sort of loss of customers, as it were, over time, is what should make it less of an impact. One concern would be the effect on local businesses, but this is the kind of thing, the writing should already be on the wall, I think, in terms of the trends in cigarette smoking in the United States, and to have it basically cut off one year's worth of additional new customers every year seems to be a reasonable thing to do. Thank you.
Okay, so by our sort of straw vote mechanism here, are you also on board with the January 1st, 04 effective date?
Okay, well, does that leave, like, as of now, like 3 months worth of people who have turned 21, and if they were just waiting till 21 to rush out and buy cigarettes, they've started?
No, if it were effective 1/1/04, it means anyone who was born on the next January 1st or later.
Born on the next, okay, so they would have had to have been born on 2000.
After 1/1/04, right?
Okay. Yeah,
So they won't turn
Remember, it's
21 until the next
21,
January
not
1st.
20.
age 21, okay.
It's 21, and those individuals will turn 21 on the next.
Okay,
January
and
1st.
is this for convenience of enforcement, that somebody can look at a driver's license and see what year they were born and not have to figure out, oh, were they, 21 in May or whatever?
I think there are a few reasons. I think that's one of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think I'd be okay with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councilor Labovitz, then Oliver. Councilor Labovitz?
Well, I'm not certain of the public health sort of the epidemiology of this as perhaps I should be, but I am curious about what percentage of smokers are just occasional smokers, and I'm just bringing that up in the context of alcohol. Does anybody know the answer to that?
Mr. Ishak, do you happen to, or Mr. Gottlieb,
Yeah.
does either
And
one of
then
you
I
have
have a couple
statistics on the
more.
casual smokers?
And then I have a couple more comments.
Okay. Do we have any data on casual nicotine users?
Like what the
Tobacco users?
percentage is?
Yeah.
If you probably give me a couple of minutes, I could get back to you and find out what that would be.
What, do you have access to
Yeah.
Google or something?
Yeah, that's what I was going to look at, is the statistic there. It's hard to define because what is defined as occasional? Is occasional a few cigarettes, or is it occasional day by day? That type of thing. Can I ask for the impact of that question?
Councilor
Well,
Labovitz?
yeah, I mean, again, I'm trying to create some analogy with alcohol use.
Yeah, so I don't know that I could give you the percentage of it, but keep in mind, tobacco and guns are probably the two things that their intent is to kill. Right, tobacco.
I understand
yeah.
that, but I'm asking a specific question, so.
Yeah, so I can
If
look
there's
for
no
the number, but I can
answer,
tell you even a few cigarettes increases your risk, cardiovascular and for lung cancer. But I can try and see if I can find that statistic.
Okay, well, he's looking that
If
up.
I
Councilor
may,
Labovitz, did you have, oh, Mr. Gottlieb, did you have a?
yeah, I'll
answer?
just say that the statistics that I've seen refer to this group of occasional smokers who are probably not addicted, as chippers, they're called, and it represents about 5% of users.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, there you go. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Councilor Labovitz.
Yeah. So I just had a couple more comments, which is I think we have to look at the public health implications, not just on the individuals, but society as a whole. One thing that was mentioned is the reduced cost of healthcare. I think anything we can do in that regard is important. Doesn't outweigh everything, but it should be consideration. The second thing is, and I think Councilor Leary mentioned this, and Councilor Maliki, I believe, is the impact on families. And I think we have to think about that as well. So we talk about sort of passive smoking, but we don't talk enough about the impact of declining health of individuals who smoke on the people close to them. And I think that's important and that's significant. So unless I hear something to the contrary, my tendency is to support this effort, starting with the date that we talked about, because I know Councilor Krinsman was going to ask me that question. Thank you.
So 1104.
Yes.
Birthdays on or after. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Oliver, followed by Mickley. Councilor Oliver?
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think most people here who know me also know that I'm not a fan of bans. This is an exception for me. There is no benefit to tobacco nicotine products ever discussed with anyone ever. I don't think anyone ever has been quoted as saying, "Oh, cigarettes are good for you. They're great. They're super." Blah blah blah. Doesn't happen. My concern in general with bans is, like we've already been discussing here, we have our influence is limited, right, to our borders. From that perspective, that's generally why, for me, bans are kind of a meh kind of situation. However, in this particular case, nicotine and nicotine products, yeah, they can all go. There's absolutely no positive benefit or neutral aspect of these products to anyone ever, regardless of how they may be discussed by, in certain marketing circles. For that perspective, I would support this moving forward, including the date, because I'm sure we're all going to get asked that question. So let's keep moving this one through. Let's see where we end up in terms of the ordinance and the language, and let's continue making sense out of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Oliver. And when you docket your item to prohibit all bans, let me know.
Nope, I won't ban bans.
Oh,
I
okay,
don't like
okay.
bans.
That's where we draw the line. Councilor Mickley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I feel conflicted on this one, honestly. I definitely support the idea of doing what we can to get cigarettes out of the hands of the youth. When I was a Brookline Town Meeting member, I was part of the group that increased the age so that you wouldn't have 18 or 19-year-olds accessing it, and then through them, younger kids. So I think it's great that our whole state moved in that direction, that we have a 21 and up restriction for tobacco. But I think there's some philosophical issues I have with the idea of restricting an entire generation, regardless of how old they become, from making decisions that those that are already at that age are empowered to make, right? I mean, what we're basically saying is that the future 25-year-olds, the 30-year-olds, the 40-year-olds, the 60-year-olds will eventually not be able to buy cigarettes or cigars or any tobacco goods in Newton. It's just a question of, what is the role of government? How much should we control, and for what, and what are the intended and unintended consequences? And I really am sympathetic for anything we can do to make it harder for young people to access cigarettes. I haven't researched this issue heavily, but my understanding is that is when addiction typically takes place in the teenage years. So if we can think of more strategic efforts to make it harder for teenagers to access cigarettes, because frankly, they're getting it, whether the age restriction is there or not. That's my bigger concern. But my concern with something like this is the unintended consequences. I think some unintended consequences, for starters, are on businesses, right? We all received many letters today from convenience stores and networks of convenience stores that are worried about what it will do for their business model and just whether it makes it attractive for them to open up businesses in Newton, which is an issue. Right now, our tax base is primarily residential. We need more commercial tax base. This just makes it that much harder. But also unintended consequences of which demographic we are really affecting with this type of restriction. I think there are different classes. I think there are people that can get to other cities and towns easier, and there's people that don't, those that have cars and those that don't. And we're essentially saying, if you're 25 or 24 this year, 30 in 5 years or 6 years, depending on which year we started, you have to drive to another city to get cigarettes, but you can't here, which means you have to own a car, which means you have to have access to mobility. That's a luxury for a lot of people having a car. So I am concerned about the unintended consequences of how much we control and for what. And we also haven't heard any letters from residents advocating for this. So I would be curious to hear more from resident input on this. Not saying we need to do a public comment session, but just all the input we've received so far from residents or from anyone really beyond this meeting is concerns for it. I'm open-minded to be persuaded on this one, but I because of both my concern of the unintended consequences of who we're really going to be impacting here and the philosophical issues I have with how far we'll go to control what, I don't think I'm there yet.
Thank you, Councilor Mickley. Councilor Albright.
So a couple of things, just on the point of government banning substances. There's plenty of substances that the government already bans. I don't have the list in my head, but lead paint came to mind quickly. There's lots of substances that we know are unhealthy for people, and they are banned by government to be a part of any product. So this is not something unfamiliar to things that government does. But in answer to Councillor Lobovitz, I mean, a quick Google, thank you for reminding me that we all have Google, Mr. Chair. There were two statistics that came up quickly. If you smoke 1 to 5 cigarettes per day, your risk of lung cancer is 7.7% increased, as opposed to 14% if you smoke more than that. And then there's one about even people who smoke fewer than 5 cigarettes a day can have early signs of cardiovascular disease. So I'm sure there's statistics that we can provide the committee that will tell you that even limited smoking is hazardous to your health. I'm glad to see that the committee seems to be generally in favor, and I find myself empathizing with Councillor Mickley's point of view, because I remember when the council got involved with banning, I think it was flavored products back a number of years ago when Councillor Schwartz was still on the committee, Dr. Schwartz. And I was in the same place where Councillor Mickley is saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be banning things like this, free speech and free activity, and it passed through the council, and I'm awfully glad it did, because anything that we can do to keep our society healthier is a good thing. And if this does get through our council, I mean, one of the pleas from Brookline, it was to hope that their neighboring communities would move ahead and pass a similar kind of ordinance. And I would want us to write to Watertown, Waltham, Needham, and any other, Boston, any other cities that I'm missing that are our neighbors, and ask them to do the same thing. And somebody that I spoke to today or yesterday or the day before said that the legislature was actually interested, that if up to, let's say, 10 communities get on board with this, this is something the legislature might be interested in looking at as a statewide issue. So thank you very much for taking this under consideration tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Albright. Asbestos comes to mind as well. Mr. Ishak.
I just want to speak from the healthcare perspective to the couple of questions there were as far as for psychiatric and mental illnesses, and then the age of addiction thing. So one of the benefits of this is people are correct. The most vulnerable group for anxiety and depression tend to be in two different groups, the 15 to 29-year-olds, and then much later in life, when there's things as far as family illness and empty nest. By moving the age up, usually one of the reasons underage users are using things like tobacco or potentially alcohol and other substances is they're self-medicating in some manner, which is what leads to this kind of crossover appearance of co-use of tobacco with mental illnesses. By moving that age up, hopefully that is one potential barrier to self-treating, and will still rely on adults and family to identify if there are features of things like anxiety and depression and how to appropriately treat versus treating with substance use. I don't remember the second health issue that was discussed in terms of tobacco consequences. I will speak to Mr. Mickley's concern about age of use for older adults. It's about 90% of users are under the age of 18, 19, and somewhere like in the high 90s is under 25 years of age. Coming from someone who has practiced in internal medicine for now 20 years, you will very, very rarely, I could tell you one person in my history from the VA through academic medicine who started smoking much older in life. So moving the age up is not likely to take away from people who want to start later in life. This tends to prey on people making decisions before they have fully developed reasoning and thinking about longer term consequences. It's very rare that someone is going to be, as they're older, decide that, I want to try and use tobacco as compared to other things such as alcohol and other things. So I hope that brings some clarity, at least from a health perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Mickley.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. And Mr. Ishak would love to dive more into this subject to learn more. I will admit I'm not an expert in it, and we didn't get too much detailed accompanying materials on this really important topic, but it is helpful to get your perspective. Just to clarify, I would be more open to a restriction that set an age limit that was the age limit we thought made sense, whether it was 23, 24, 25. The part that is most concerning for me is us making a ban on the decisions that a future 30-year-old or 40-year-old or even 60-year-old can make in terms of if they want to buy a cigar, go golfing, if they want to smoke a cigarette once every few years and buy that in Newton. Those are the type of restrictions that concern me in terms of what we do with government and how much we control. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands. I will add that I am fully in support of this. I think that the way to make lasting change is methodically and usually in a calculated way. Radical change doesn't tend to be as lasting. And I think this proposal does have the benefit of essentially being a gradual change. In overall, we've sort of seen a gradual shift in public policy when it comes to nicotine and tobacco. There were plenty of folks who wanted to ban all tobacco sales the second studies were made public in the 70s, but obviously that wasn't what was going to happen. And there were others who thought it made no sense to fund transportation education with a tobacco tax, because then the state becomes reliant on those sales. My position is that we're there. We've done it in a progressive enough way that we can now start getting to I think what you referred to as the nicotine-free generation. So I'm fully in support of this. I think if I count myself in support, I think that gives us at least 5. So I would say that a majority of the committee has expressed support for this. Mr. Lee, I'm saying this because I think we have support for the policy that sort of mirrors the prohibition on all nicotine sales, with the exceptions, I think, as Mr. Ishak pointed out, in terms of smoking cessation products. I think we should model our proposal on the ones that have passed, and I think we're looking at a 1104 birth date as the operative date. I think it would, Mr. Lee, let me just ask, do you have any other questions that you would need answered before you can draft the ordinance to come back to us?
I do not. I imagine that it's going to mirror the current definitions of tobacco product that we already have. So we're not going to be changing any definitions or anything like that. So I think it will be a fairly easy red line.
Okay, then what I would look for, I think, is a motion to hold from the committee, and we'll take this up again when we have the draft ordinance, if that works for the committee.
I move to hold.
Council Labovitz has moved to hold. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Great, that was resounding. Any opposed to holding? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ishak. Thank you, Mr. Gottlieb. Commissioner Walsh, thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. It was an interesting discussion. So stay tuned, more to come, at least from the Newton City Council. Have a good night, those of you who are here for that. The next item before us is item 176-24. This is requesting authorization to transfer $165,000 for the tennis courts at Newton South High School. We've been joined by my esteemed colleague, Councilor Lyle Baker, member of the committee, the most important member of the committee. Councilor Baker, welcome. Commissioner Banks, I imagine you are presenting this one, is that right?
Yes. Hi, good evening. Thank you, Chair Krinsman. I would love to make the presentation tonight about the Newton South tennis courts.
We'd love to have it.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. It looks like I do have the ability to do that. Oh, no, Jacqueline, would you mind if I share my screen? I just have a couple of slides. I think the photos will actually do this justice.
I've just enabled it.
Okay.
Councilor Albright, maybe one day you'll get promoted enough to actually be able to share screen too. That's like the next level promotion.
Okay, well, now's the part where I make sure everyone can see the shared screen.
Looks great, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you for having me here this evening. I wanted to share what the current conditions are over at the South Tennis Courts. And we are in a two-step process to fully restore these courts. So tonight's funding request is looking to complete the restoration that we started last summer. So this photo shows 2 of the 4 courts that were completely restored last summer. The reason that we started with these 4 courts that are closest to Lion Drive is that they had the worst cracks and they were in the worst condition. Last spring during the school tennis season, they were actually not able to use 2 of these 4 courts. And so those were very important for us to get that work done completed last summer. So for this spring, as they're just about starting their tennis season, they will be able to use all 12 of the courts. So this just gives an idea of what the full resurfacing includes, and of course shows what the condition of the courts will look like following that full surfacing. The way that we did last summer's project was with ARPA funds that were supported by the mayor to get us started on this improvement. This photo shows the condition of the other 8 courts. And so what you're seeing in this photo is some temporary patch repair work that was done on the other 8 courts. There is a significant amount of crack repair. You see 2,000 linear feet of crack repair, but a lot of that, you'll see it under the net. You'll see it at certain sections where the seams of the courts come together, and that's pretty regular to see that kind of crack form over time. This crack repair was done as a temporary fix, again, to get us through this spring season. But when they come back in to do the full resurfacing, this crack repair will be removed. They will do a full membrane crack repair system that lasts about 7 to 10 years. And then they'll do all of the resurfacing and painting, completing the traction that the court will have, and repaint all of the lines. We have lined up to have the work done mid-June. And it will take about 2 to 3 weeks to complete the 8 courts. This is a really important timeline for us because it will allow the work to start right when our high school competitive season ends, and it will be right before our summer program for Parks and Recreation begins. We have a very important tennis season in the summer that helps us to provide programming to the community. And those funds that come in are also part of what we put back into the courts to take care of all of our neighborhood courts that we have throughout the city. So we want to make sure we can have all of those activities happening. And then lastly, I will just say that we have deemed the high school courts to be the most important courts to receive this resurfacing. 2 years ago, we did the 10 courts at Newton North, and there's 12 courts at Newton South that we would like to complete the resurfacing for. Parks, Recreation, and Culture, Newton Public Schools Athletic Department, and Friends of Newton Tennis have all done our work to inventory and look at the condition of the courts, and these are the highest priority. They are lighted courts, and they do, as I said, provide the competitive play for our high school, and then our league plays for recreation tennis. With that, I'll do a quick flip through just so you can see the photos one more time. And I'll stop sharing my screen so that we can see each other if there's any questions. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Banks. Appreciate it. And I know that you were at finance on Monday night, right?
Yes.
I know,
so
for the
finance.
edification of my colleagues, normally we would go first and then finance would take it up. There's somewhat of an urgency to this as I understand it. And given that we pushed our meeting off a week from the 3rd into the 10th, I spoke with Councillor Gentile, who essentially said, you know, I'd like to keep this moving as I know you would. Would you mind if I heard it before you? And I said, of course not, let's keep this moving, go right ahead. So although it's not usually the traditional way of doing it, I think the sentiments were in the right place and everyone wanted to keep this moving. Commissioner Banks, can I just ask, I feel like there was if I'm not mistaken, there was a question on Monday night about the source of the funding. Do you have information on that?
So the source of the funding for this request is from the budget reserve. And I think the question was just for the finance department, why was this from the budget reserve and not from another source such as free cash?
Right.
I haven't received any follow-up information, but I believe Perry and Connor were at the meeting for the finance committee, and they were going to prepare a follow-up for this. The statement that was made on Monday night was that there was enough left in the reserve fund, and as it was getting further along in the year, that the city was recommending that it come from there. I don't know if, I believe Jonathan Yeo
It
might
looks
be
like
here.
our Chief Operating Officer, Jonathan Yeo, or his phone has joined the meeting. And perhaps it's to answer this question. Mr. Yeo, is that you?
That is me. Thank you. And the free cash levels are low at this point, and we have budget reserve, which needs to get spent appropriately. We thought this was a good place to take it from. So at this point in the year, we are looking at those two sources as we move along, and we're out of the snow and ice season, we hope. So we think we're in the clear in terms of needing, say, budget reserve to help fund snow and ice. So that's it's really the basic reason is that budget reserve is the place to tap at this time of the year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Banks, you were done, right? I can go to council's questions?
Yes, thank you. Happy to take
Okay.
questions.
Okay. I just want to make sure. Councilor Oliver, followed by Lavovitz. Councilor Oliver?
Great, thanks, Chair. I think that this is probably one of the few slam dunks. I hate to mix my sports metaphors there, but
It's an overhead slam.
yeah, yeah, there you go. There, overhead smash or whatever it's called, right? As a non-tennis person, but I'm happy to move it when the time comes. The only question I guess I was about to ask, but it sounds like it might be irrelevant. Did finance end up approving the item? Did they approve it, you know, pending second call or the answer? But it sounds like we have the answer. So I'm just happy to move it for approval or move approval when the time comes. But thank you very much.
Yeah, someone someone who was there is more than welcome to correct me, but I believe finance passed it.
They did.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. Councilor Lobovitz?
Thank you.
So as somebody new to the financial issues, I just wanted to clarify a couple of questions. One is this a typical or accepted use of a reserve fund? Is there sort of a general description of how reserve fund is used? And my second question is there a time limit on using reserve funds? Does it all have to be used by a certain date, or is it held over? You know,
Yeah,
Mr.
Mr. Gio,
Chair.
you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure, Mr. Chair. Counselor, those are two excellent questions. And the answer is that those reserves can be used for anything and typically are used for whatever is a priority this time of year, especially as we're done with snow and ice. And the timing is that it has to be used this fiscal year. So this is the time, April, May, and June, to resolve all the free cash and budget reserve spending.
So just to follow up to that,
Yep.
Is there any other competing demand for the reserve fund, you know, in terms of this amount of money?
Well, we will come forward with other items in free cash and reserve over the next, month and a half. But this was deemed a high priority. Fixing both of the high school courts, getting those in tip-top shape, as well as the athletic fields, has been a very high priority of the administration.
So as far as anyone knows right now, there's no competing demand for these funds that people might consider a higher priority? I guess that's mine.
We decided this was the highest priority, and that's why we put this forward. As you see, we put forward a great deal of other spending items as well through free cash. We just did $12.4 million. We have other things that are moving through. You'll see spending from a variety of departments, and then you'll also see, coming up in the next few weeks, you'll also see transfers of funds between accounts to accomplish other, either make up for shortfalls or to make other investments around the city. So you'll see this time of year money moving around in different directions, and we're always happy to answer questions on why and where and how.
Yeah, well, my question was more general for the other counselors, as far as anybody knows. There's nothing that sort of is pending that people think could be more important than this. That it's not just a question for you, Mr. Yao.
I mean, I'm happy to recognize others who want to speak to their own personal priorities or other ways that they would like to spend the money.
Mr. Chair, I think that did come up in finance.
You want to speak to that, Councilor Humphrey?
It was just briefly, I think that did come up in the finance meeting, since that's the financial component of it. And I think Councilor Bixby specifically asked. So maybe if folks are wondering, they can go review that. But I mean, it's a fair question, but it seems like a fine use of the funding to make. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. And again, I'll let others speak to, personal preference. Councilor Mickley, followed by Malky. Councilor Mickley?
Yeah, to use a sports analogy, I think this is an ace. I think that'd be the more appropriate tennis analogy. Clear ace. What I really like about it is I think our tennis courts are widely used and always in demand. I'm a regular tennis player, mostly on the north side, so I don't get to the south courts that much, but you see them used during the day, night, weekend, and used by a wide range of different residents of different ages, right? It's a lifetime sport. You have kids playing, you have older people playing, you have adults playing. And I really like to see Parks and Recs funding being spent on things like this. It's used by such a multi-generational audience, so fully support it and excited to support more things like this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mickley. Councilor Malky?
Yeah, I voted for it in finance, where I believe we were unanimous. I just had a question. and maybe I should know this, but I don't remember hearing we want to spend it from budget reserve because we have to use it up instead of free cash, because am I wrong that budget reserve would drop to free in an account would drop to free cash if it were not used? So it seems like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
I think that's right, Mr. Yo.
Yes, yeah, it would drop to next year's free cash and we wouldn't be able to fix these courts right now, so.
But I'm talking about the amount in budget reserve.
Mhm.
Why you're saying that it has to be spent from budget reserve instead of free cash when they would, either way, money left over would get locked up for a period until next.
That is correct. Either way, the money gets locked up until next fall. Generally, budget reserve is all spent every single year, either through snow and ice or through other end of the year investments. Free cash for the most part is spent. Sometimes there are amounts that are strategically left in free cash to fall to next year. So we decided that this was the best use of these funds.
And maybe was this such a non-snowy winter that there was more in the budget reserve for snow and ice than usual? Is that what's going
Correct.
on?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the snow stayed up north. So.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just say from the timeline for the project, Derek Mannion, our superintendent of grounds, was able to get us on the contractor's schedule at this kind of busy time of year when it's just getting warm enough to do courts, and get us the slot in between those two, the high school season and the rec season. So we really just wanted to try to see if we could move it forward at this time of year because of those conditions.
Councilor Midgley, your hand was up. Did you take it down? Because
Yes, I did. Thank you.
okay. Then, seeing no other hands, it sounds like we may be at a point where I believe Councilor Oliver has moved approval. If I have that correct. This was his layout.
That was my desire, yes.
Yep. Okay. The layout that you wanted to use to score a touchdown.
The home run I was looking to hit, yes.
I apologize. Yep. Okay. Councilor Oliver has moved approval. Any further discussion on that motion? Okay. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you,
Thank
Commissioner
you.
Banks. And thank you, Mr. Yo. Our last item is item 28-24. This was a discussion and possible amendments to Chapter 21, Article 3, trees. I know that there have, Councilor Kelly had a docket item on this topic as well. And I know that our Deputy Commissioner, Mr. Welch, do I get your title
Sure.
wrong every time?
Yep.
What is it actually?
It's Deputy Commissioner and City Forester.
Okay, so I kind of nailed it. Right? Well, at least half of it. Are here. Jacqueline, is Lawrence Lee in the attendees? Can you promote Lawrence Lee as well? I know that Lawrence Lee had some concerns around this item that he wanted to speak to. I said I would let him. Mr. Welch and Councilor Kelly, are you aware of the issues that some folks are having, or do you want to speak to that at all, or should I hear from Mr. Lee first?
I'll just say, I was, as you asked me, I wasn't ready to talk about my item yet tonight. I'm definitely interested in hearing from Mr. Lee and others, and my item will come before you soon, but I may make some comments tonight.
Okay.
Well, if it's pertinent to what you're talking about. Thank you.
Okay, happy to give you the time. Mr. Lee, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for letting me speak. I'm actually at City Hall, ironically. So I'm at City Hall and you guys are all at home. So what really struck me about this tree ordinance is the challenge that we have in complying, frankly. So the provisions related to trees on adjoining lots having this tree save area, where when I say you, I mean a homeowner, landowner, they wish to do a project and they apply for a tree permit. certain circumstances require them to survey an adjoining property and to assess the trees on adjoining lots, which is exactly what it says on the construction provision or definition in the ordinance. And that's really an impossibility because surveyors are not allowed to trespass on other people's land without their permission. I actually had Vern Porter with me tonight. He and I were on another matter together, and Vern can speak to the trespassing component for surveyors. But that's the beginning of it. The other thing is that as it relates to the assessment of a tree, I understand that by tree permit, you can do construction work in a tree safe area. However, you really can't properly do a tree assessment or tree protection plan without full access to the tree in question, which sometimes requires you to actually get to the tree. So say, for example, if you happen to have a tree on a neighbor's lot, and you're now required in this ordinance to assess that tree, and that tree also has a tree safe area that intrudes into your property, you can't comply with that because you can't get to the tree, and you can't have an assessment of that tree, whether it's healthy or not healthy. And so effectively, it's an ordinance that we cannot comply. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pause for a quick moment. I'm going to let Vern Porter, who is sitting next to me, speak in terms of what he is or is not allowed to do as a licensed surveyor.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks. And then if Mr. Lee or Mr. Porter, if there's a specific sort of resolution that you'd be looking for, it might be helpful just so that we as a committee could discuss that or contemplate that.
Good evening, Vern Porter. I'm a licensed land surveyor. I live at 354 Elliott Street, Newton. So we've been dealing with the tree ordinance, and as Lauren said, that as a surveyor, we're not allowed to trespass on other people's property without their permission. And even if we did have their permission, we're still subject to liability and whatnot if we damage anything while we're there. So it's something that we can't do and just enter someone's property. The other thing is just as an experience from looking at this ordinance, I mean, it almost encourages people to cut down trees. I mean, I just have a project I'm working on that had, you know, a ring of trees around the perimeter, and we had no intention on touching them. But because of this ordinance and a strict compliance to it, the only way to do what we wanted to do is to physically cut down the trees. And I know that's not what you wanted to do, but it almost forces people to cut down the trees on their property to enable them to use their land. You know, Wellesley has a very good tree ordinance, and so I think it's similar to what you guys want to have. And if you looked at their ordinance, you know, they have a tree yard area, which is basically the setback areas, and then those are the protected trees, and then other trees, you know, we do the same thing. We have the tree yards and whatnot, and it actually, you know, it's difficult, but it works. I think it's a better solution than the one we have now, because it almost encourages people to cut down trees, and I really don't think that's what's intended. So that's all. Thank you.
So I want to go back to, in terms of the tree safe area particularly, so there's a multiplier of 1.5 feet. So it's based off of the caliper inches of a tree. And I want to use an example of the neighboring tree having effectively a easement or a restriction placed on, let's say it's my property. You know, based on the ordinance, let's say we have a tree that's 10 feet in the neighbor's lot, and it's a large tree. Let's call it 40 caliper inches or greater. Let's call it 40. Effectively now, with a multiplier of 1.5, you're at a 60-foot tree safe area. So 10 feet away from my property, or from the inside of the neighbor's property, you now have 50 feet of this tree safe area that effectively serves as a restriction, a building restriction on my land. And I can't do anything about it because I cannot get to my neighbor's property. I'm not allowed to cut their tree. I'm not allowed to even get up to the tree to assess the health or come up with a tree protection plan. So along with what Vern had indicated, that we are not allowed to trespass, we have an ordinance essentially that is impossible to comply with because it requires trespassing. And it imposes a building restriction that effectively circumvents zoning. So again, I hope, and that was not the intention, but effectively that's what this is doing. And that's why I'm actually coming on board here. I live in Newton. I'm not being paid for my time tonight. I'm not representing anyone in particular about this. I saw this ordinance, I read it. As an attorney, I just felt that that's going above and beyond and overreaching. And that's sort of, and I've expressed that to various members of the city. I wish that it needs to be, I think it really does need to be amended in that particular instance.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Appreciate that. Councilor Maliki, I see that you have your hand up. I'm going to come to you in 1 second. I just want to ask Deputy Commissioner and Tree Warden Welch, did you have a comment on this? Because I know there's some discretion in the ordinance for you, correct?
Yeah, I think that I can see some of the points. I think we could probably, I think one of the challenges is not very many people, if anyone, has really outlined a specific example or come to us with a permit application where this was prohibitive, where we could work through the details and try to see if we could come up with a solution. But what I would say is that, again, you can work within a tree save area. So I think there's some, so with the right amount of tree protection, planning, and thought, in most cases, and maybe every case, I don't know, because I haven't had an opportunity to review one where it was building was being prohibited, that you know, again, the ordinance as written doesn't restrict construction within that tree save area. It just requires that once you're in that tree save area, you create a tree protection plan. And I would say that in general, there are some finer details if you're really assessing some aspects of tree health and tree risk, but in general, you can create a tree protection plan and still be a distance from the tree to create the protection plan. You don't.
Okay, let me come to Councilor Maliki, and then Mr. Lee, if you have more comments, or Mr. Lee from the city. I know it looked like you were stewing there for a second. So if either one of you has comments, I'm happy to come to you. But let me, Councilor Maliki's had her hand up. I apologize, Councilor Maliki. Go ahead.
Thank you, and I hope you're going to let other people on the Zoom who would like to address the issue speak as well. It's a bit hard when we're not in the usual meeting format, and you've got an attorney and surveyor who seem to get preferred access to this meeting, and without any public notice that there would be a discussion. Doesn't seem like there was any information given to Mark Welch, and there certainly wasn't any information given to the committee. I would like to also point out that this committee, I was not on it then, but Pam Wright can attest, spent nearly 2 years debating this, and we didn't, I don't think, see these gentlemen at any of the public hearing opportunities for that. I see this as protecting the rights of homeowners who bought their houses because they liked their tree canopied lot, may have put money and time and effort into keeping their trees healthy, and too often development happens next door and destroys the roots of their trees in one way or another, whether it's excavating or building up retaining walls or construction equipment or whatever, and their trees suffer an early demise. So I think that's who we ought to be thinking about protecting. And if we're going to hear from the people who want to keep doing what they've been doing, I'd like to hear from the people who are wanting to protect their trees as well.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Maliki. I don't see any other councilors at the moment. Councilor Maliki is correct. I did allow people to come in here, and I will allow others to speak if they want to. So I do see a couple of our attendees who have their hands up. Jacqueline, if you can maybe bring Mark Sangiolo in. Mr. Lee, Andrew Lee, did you have your hand up? Did you want to weigh in?
I did just very briefly, Mr. Chair. So speaking to some of the comments by Attorney Lawrence Lee, in terms of the claim that the ordinance inappropriately places certain restrictions on property, I'd have to disagree. The law department's comfortable that this ordinance in effect is legally defensible. But with regards to practical administration and implementation, keep in mind, this is a new ordinance. There is still some evaluation that needs to be done in order to properly assess how it's actually going to be implemented. And we are going to continue exploring that with the Deputy Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. Looks like Mr. Sangiolo is now here. You should be able to unmute yourself. Mr. Sangiolo, did you want to weigh in?
Yes, hi. I'm an architect and we deal with the tree ordinance a lot. This is going to be really difficult for me as we try to decide what the setbacks are when we start a project. So we're going to be at the really at the mercy of the arborist that's hired. And if there's so much pressure on them, they're going to probably be overly cautious in what the actual setback is. So it's going to throw a whole monkey wrench in this in the building process. And I don't see the is there data showing what the impacts are on neighbors' trees? Do we know, has that been studied? I mean, you know, you're making these decisions and I don't see the real data that allows you to come up with a system that's workable. Also remember that different trees have different root lengths and different drip edges. And I just don't see that this is going to be a workable thing for the permitting process and the building process. One thing you could do is
I'm sorry, Mr. Sangiolo, are you talking about the existing ordinance or the proposed revision?
The proposed.
Okay.
The proposed, because you need an arborist to do the tree plan, and then that's going to decide how far away you can build on your property, blah, blah, blah. And it's a lot of pressure on the arborist. So, and then the other problem with many of these things too is many of these new regulations that are coming up. There's not enough roll-in time. So this thing goes into effect right away, and it should be at least a year roll-in, because when these processes now take so long to permit, I think the permitting and approvals are approaching 30% of project costs now. It takes so much time, so much effort, so much money goes into it. So somebody buys a piece of property expecting they can do A, and in the end, now we have a new regulation, they can only do B. So you have to give them time for this whole thing to work through, where now you're purchasing the property for less because you can only do B. You can't just like, oh, now we have a new ordinance, now you have to meet this. Those are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. I see two more of our attendees who have their hands up. I want to recognize them, and then I'll come back, bring it back in council here. So Hideko Montero, Jacqueline, could you maybe bring both Hideko and Melissa, Dr. Brown into the meeting? I can hear from them, and then we can bring it back in committee. While we're waiting for that promotion to happen, Councilor Kelly, do you want to speak?
Oh, sure. Thank you. I would love to. I was really interested to hear Mr. Lawrence Lee and Vern Porter's perspective, because from a practical point of view, it may be hard to access trees that are on other people's property, both for a homeowner or a developer or an arborist or a surveyor. So I think that is something for the committee to be thinking about. My issues with it are a little bit different, and that's what I was going to bring forward. Unfortunately, and I appreciate also very much hearing from Mark Sangiolo, because I've heard from several other architects who are already trying to wrestle with the implications this may have for them. And I think, to Julia's point earlier, people were not necessarily paying attention ahead of time to this, and that happens. We see that all the time on almost every matter. Some people who are affected become aware of changes late to the game and enter the conversation after a lot of discussion. And I know that's frustrating, but it's also the real world. One of those architects is our former colleague, Deb Crossley, who part of why I wasn't ready to speak to it this week is she just got a new knee yesterday or the day before. And I don't think she's, can't speak for her, but she might be on painkillers for a day or two and not really ready to talk to it. But she was concerned we didn't join this process until also late in it because we're on other P committees and we're not able to have participated very fully at programs and services. And I felt bad about that, but her concerns were a little bit, Mr. Lawrence Lee touched on it, whether it's called a tree save area or whatever, this kind of setback that becomes somewhat restricted. She was seeing it in clients, homeowner, individual clients, not developers. It was really impacting their ability to do what they wanted or needed to do on their property in order to stay. Another impact that, and I could be wrong, so do correct me on this. I thought I saw that even if you were to take down, say, a large Norway maple, which is now considered invasive, you would have to replace that by caliper. And I hope I misunderstood that, because if that's true, it doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm happy to hear from Councillor Ryder, Maliki, or Mark Welsh to correct me on that. One of Deb Crossley's clients was trying to age in place and needed to put on a small accessible addition, and there was a tree right there, and it was going to cost something like $12,000 or $15,000 to. It was a big tree to replace that, and those kind of fees make it really untenable for many homeowners. So the replacement of invasive trees, the fees associated, and the limits to property owners' ability to do some kind of building or construction on their site are some of the concerns I have. I think accessing trees on other people's properties, as Lawrence Lee pointed out, might be another problem that I hadn't really thought about till I heard it tonight. So I thank Mr. Lee and Mr. Porter for being here, and I thank Mark Sangiolo for speaking up. And I hope that the committee will consider some of these unforeseen circumstances. I appreciate when Mark Welsh, I think I was hearing you sort of say, well, until we have an actual proposal or petition or application, we can't really assess, but that sounds a little bit like guesswork. And I don't think we have had some real life cases, but from the architects and attorneys who have been reaching out to me, and I guess because of land use in the last couple of weeks, I do think we will be seeing some proposals that will test this ordinance in both directions. So those are some seeds of my concerns. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Next I have Hideko Montero.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I would like to be brief, so don't take that much time. My name is Hideko Montero from Spruhan Engineering. We are located at 80 Jewett Street, Newton. We do agree with everything that Mr. Lawrence Lee and Vernon said. I mean, having read the bylaws, it is a Spruhan Engineering's opinion that it will be impossible to comply with this new tree ordinance because of access to abutting lots. Just as an example, we constantly get calls from unhappy neighbors about our field crew in the area, sometimes not even in their lots, just in the area around their lot. And that's practically all we wanted to bring in. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Melissa Brown.
Hi, thank you. So I am a Newton resident of Newton Upper Falls. I am also a member of Protect Newton Trees and Mothers Out Front Newton. And I want to say that I am speaking off the cuff because I was not aware of what was going to be exactly on the agenda tonight. And I would like to request that tree advocates from Protect Newton Trees and Mothers Out Front Newton have an equal amount of time as Mr. Lawrence Lee to present a fuller case at a future meeting before any final decisions are made. We do fully support the tree canopy, and we had a petition signed by 471 Newton registered voters who supported not only the tree ordinance that was passed and went into effect on March 1st, but those 471 people wanted a stronger ordinance with more protections than were put into them after the almost 2-year deliberations of this committee. So I am dismayed that the committee is considering winding back some of the things from its 2 years worth of work, particularly given that I think Mark Welsh has definitely the ability and expertise, although God knows if he has the time, to be able to address these concerns. The city of Cambridge has had similar policies and even more extensive ones in place since 2019. So obviously architects and landscapers in Cambridge have found a way to work through these things. And if given the opportunity to do a little research on this, I can consult with somebody in Cambridge and present that information to you at a future time. So I hope you will, at the very least, maintain the tree ordinance as it is, and not roll back what it took 2 years to come to a compromise agreement on. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goldberg, I'm going to come to you in 1 second. I see that Councilor Wright has her hand up yet, and she hasn't spoken yet, so I want to come to her. Or Councilor Wright, would it be okay with you if I get the rest of these attendees, and then we can bring it back in committee?
Also, Mr. Welch should speak too before me.
Okay, but they had already spoken. That's why I was coming to you. But okay, let me, Mr. Goldberg.
Hi, I'm a longtime resident in the city, and I'm also an attorney, and this was brought to my attention, and I've just been following. And I'm concerned that whatever these regulations are not really intended to achieve what their claimed intention is. And I'd like Councilor Malloy to possibly clarify her comment she made, because she seemed to give me the impression this wasn't so much about saving trees as quote unquote stopping developers. And as a property owner, I want to be able to do what I'm allowed to do vis-a-vis the zoning code and all that. And a tree on another property shouldn't prevent me from being able to do what I'd like to do on my property. And so if I'm not a developer, as someone sitting in my house, why are I guess the wishes of what Ms. Brown just said was less than 1% of the Newton voters outweighing the property owners around the city?
Thank you, Mr. Goldberg. Mr. McGuire?
Hi, this is Chad McGuire. I am a Newton resident and also happen to be a developer. I've spent a lot of time saving trees on my property instead of just cutting everything down like a lot of some developers do. One thing that I wanted to add to this is the cost that's associated, which was touched on by one of the speakers before me. You know, in some situations, these things can cost, if it's a homeowner, never mind me as a developer, $15,000 to replace a tree. But the other costs that are associated with, basically the cost of the arborist, or in a situation that I'm in right now, I've been unable to get in touch with a neighbor for a month because they were out of the country, and I'm currently paying 9.5% on my commercial loan for a property that I'm looking to start, and basically paying $16,000-$17,000 a month in interest carry on my project that I would like to be able to cut a check to the city of Newton for my permit, because everything's basically approved except for me being able to get through the tree permitting process. So there's significant costs just above and beyond what a person is paying to replace the inches. It's time and a significant amount of money that's happening in a time when we're all dealing with inflation to begin with. The cost of building is extremely high. cost of labor has gone up. Everything is going up and up and up, and we all are experiencing that in our own different ways. But time and money, because I'm unable to get in touch with a neighbor to be able to consult with them about their tree and how to deal with it with the new tree ordinance, just because they were out of the country and not returning my phone calls, not returning any letters. It's a very big problem that I wanted to just bring that to somebody's attention too.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Okay, I think that those are all the comments we have from attendees. My suspicion is that because we don't have really a specific proposal or draft ordinance language, that it would be inappropriate for us to vote something out tonight. So I do think that ultimately we should hold this item. I would encourage Mr. Lawrence Lee to, if there's a specific proposal or a draft language or draft amendment to the ordinance that he would like to see, that he maybe share that with the committee or Mr. Welch, and we can talk about that. But before we get to that point, I do want to make sure everyone else has an opportunity to speak. So, Councilor Wright, you had your hand up, had not yet spoken on this item, so I want to give you the opportunity to go next. Then Councilor Greenberg, then I'll come back to Councilors Maliki and Mr. Welch. So, Councilor Wright.
Thank you, Chair Krinsman. So a few things on this. You know, there is a cost, which isn't actually the full cost of replacing the tree, and but it could be no cost if you replace trees on your property. So this is, you're going to take down the tree or whatever, and you're not going to replace it with anything. And to the Norway maple, yes, we don't plant Norway maples, but a mature Norway maple is doing a lot to combat climate change and helping with runoff water and reducing the heat islands and things like that. So it's still a beneficial tree, and we shouldn't be able to just clear cut Norway maples just because we won't plant any more of those. Right now, Somerville was in the paper today. They're ripping up asphalt yards and things like that to put in more grass and trees. And if anything, we should be, especially on the north side, we have a much bigger heat island here and along Washington Street. We should be trying to be putting in more trees and saving the trees, you know, that we do have. Again, this ordinance is not saying you can't do it, but it may cost you. You want to think about it. Maybe you don't want to put that addition on this side, maybe over on the other side. And my neighbor has a 150-year-old maple tree in the backyard, which, you know, the drip path or whatever is, you know, in my yard. And it would be horrible for that tree to be coming down because I decided, you know, to add a basement to the back of my house. So, and as in land use, we always talk about, or, you know, always try to talk to your neighbors. And I feel concerned that, you know, it's been months trying to get a hold of this neighbor, but this ordinance, I think, only took effect March 1st. So it's a very new ordinance. And again, in a lot of our ordinances, we have something in place and then we see how it works, and then you got to do some tweakings. And I'd rather do that than, you know, throwing it out or drastic change. And I just thought what we have isn't as much as I wanted, but was a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Greenberg.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was on the committee when we spoke about this ordinance for the past 2 years, and I'm afraid we didn't really discuss the issue of the tree save area enough and the unintended consequences that it might cause. And now that Mr. Lawrence Lee brought up these issues, I think this is definitely something we need to re-examine. I had a question for Mr. Andrew Lee. If a neighbor whose tree may be affected by construction of the neighbor who's doing the construction on their property, can they not agree to the tree save area plan? Can they say, no, I want more done? It's not good enough. I want my tree more protected. And say the tree doesn't survive, doesn't survive the construction. who pays for that tree? Does the person doing the construction have to replace that tree? Just how would that work?
I'm happy to recognize Mr. Lee, but I actually think Mr. Welch, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the tree warden who approves the tree save, the plan. Correct? Not a neighbor or anyone else.
Correct. The tree, we would sign off on, we issue a tree permit because they provided a tree plan that we agree with.
Okay. Mr. Lee, did you want to weigh in on something?
I did. The deputy commissioner answered one of the questions, but the short of it is that the ordinance doesn't give the abutters that happens to own a tree any rights that they don't already have under the law. But the fact is, if you're doing something on your own property that happens to damage a tree that is in someone else's yard, you have that right as long as you're only doing the work on your own property. That's the general rule. Of course, there are circumstances where other things might come into play, but it goes in the same thing where if someone has a tree that is in their yard that's growing over onto yours, what's on your side, you can cut down those branches and do those things.
Councilor Reed merges that in. Go ahead.
So if the tree save area plan is not effective and the tree does die, the abutting neighbor doesn't have any recourse.
Under the ordinance, there is no recourse, and then in terms of whatever their rights are, they'd have to consult their own counsel.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Okay,
would just
thank
add, just adding on
Go ahead, Mr.
that,
Welch.
there's lots of case law for that. State of Massachusetts even has its own website for dedicated to trees and the law. There's case law that would dictate it basically becomes a civil matter between the two parties.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Maliki, and then I'll come back to you, Mr. Welch. Councilor Maliki.
Yeah, just to follow up on Councilor Greenberg's question. Basically, I think as has been said, the tree save area can't get any bigger. The 1.5 feet per inch is hopefully going to be enough to protect most trees, maybe not a huge beech tree, but most trees. And then if the tree dies anyway, they would have the same privilege of trying to find a lawyer and take the case as they do now. What this ordinance does is hopefully reduce the likelihood that they would have to take that because the tree won't die. I just wanted to remind everyone that a abutter notification is part of the ordinance when construction is going on. So the applicant to get a tree permit has to attest that they've notified their neighbors, and that would be the time to request permission to go on the property. And I could tell you that, you know, not just the last 2 years of the ordinance, but going back years, I've heard from so many people who are so distraught and frustrated that their tree is getting damaged by, usually it's excavation next door, and they would love to get protection for their tree, but there has been no provision for that in city ordinances, even though it's in the city's interest to preserve tree canopy, especially where people want to preserve their own tree canopy. So I think getting permission to go on a property to measure a tree, all you have to do is say, I want to measure your tree, so I make sure to protect it. And most people would welcome that. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Commissioner Welch.
Thank you. I had originally raised my hand for one particular point, but a couple others, and I'll just be brief because I do think it requires, I think we do need to do further discussion, but I think the number one thing that I've heard today that I agree with, we're on week 6 of this ordinance. I think, you know, we do need some time here to really see where these issues pop up and where the concerns are. So I think we can work through them, and whether that's here in committee or as we work through it. I just think we need a little more time. One of the things I would point out, numbers wise, we averaged previous to the change, we averaged normally, I'd say 20 to 25 permit applications a month. We are down only a few permits. We've had 16 in the last month. So and issued permits. So those are folks who have received tree permits. So there's at least 16 projects that have figured out how to apply and go through the process and get issued a tree permit. what I wanted to point out about construction and trees is it isn't, it is a well-known process. It's documenting the damage that construction causes to trees has been something that's been managed, tracked, and analyzed for decades. So there is an industry standard. We're on the 3rd edition of the industry standard that sets out what to do for the protection of trees. It takes into account species, growing conditions, all of those things, all things that a qualified certified arborist who's experienced in tree protection will know how to manage. So that's why we wouldn't reject a plan if a good plan is developed by an arborist. We're unlikely to reject what they turn into us because they're going to use the same standards. And I would also just, point out that the #1 complaint that I've had as it relates to private tree property in the 22 years that I've been enforcing our tree ordinance is the damage caused by construction to the neighbor's trees. It's the most frequent phone call we get. It's the most frequent issue that I observe. And so it happens, and it happens a lot. So this is, it is something somehow it would be great. That's why it was here. We proposed it in this ordinance because it is an issue. There is real damage being caused to neighboring trees during construction.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands up for discussion. So again, my recommendation is to hold this item until we get some sort of a specific proposal that can be debated if there's a counselor who wants to bring it forward. So can I get a motion to hold?
Move hold.
Counselor Humphrey has moved hold. Discussion on that motion. Counselor Wright?
There's 2 people in the attendees that have their hands raised.
Yeah, I do see that there are 2 attendees with their hands up, but again, I brought it back in committee and I wanted to try and finish our committee discussion. Counselor Maliki?
I'd like to hear from the people who are here.
Counselor Maliki, again, I gave the public plenty of opportunity, then said we're going to bring it back in committee. We're now back in committee. So I'm trying to let us debate this. We have a motion to hold on the table. Do you want to weigh in on that motion? You can vote no on hold if you want. Try and keep this open a while longer.
Okay.
Okay. Any other discussion on the motion to hold? Counselor Albright. Counselor Albright, you're on mute. There you go.
Sorry. So yeah, sorry. The nature of the docket item is very
Broad.
it's so bland you don't know what's going to be discussed. So maybe there could be some parens that are added when you've got a specific topic so that the committee and the public knows what's going to come up. That would be my suggestion to help deal with these kinds of changes that people might be interested in.
Yeah, that's fair. Thank you for that suggestion. Counselor Labovitz?
How many other people had their hands up to speak?
There are 2 attendees with their hands up.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on the motion to hold? Okay. All those in favor of hold, please say aye.
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 I heard 3. Humphrey, Oliver, Princeman,
Aye.
Mickley, 4. Those opposed?
No.
No.
Maliki, Labovitz? Abstentions? Okay. 4-3, the item is held. That is our last item of the evening. So I thank you, everyone. Councilor Albright, I think it's a good suggestion that we try to provide more notice of what the items are that will be discussed. I had actually tried to get some sort of additional materials, some additional references to what the issues were. Wasn't able to get those in time for the packet, but had already noticed the meeting, so felt that we had to go forward with it. So my apologies to the committee that we didn't have more information. Thank you all. Have a wonderful night, and we'll meet again. Good night, everyone.
Bye.